Maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro.
Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 10 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs.
Le comité se réunit.
The committee is meeting in the context of its study on suicide prevention among veterans.
Witnesses, for people who are viewing, I would like to provide a trigger. We will be discussing experiences related to suicide and grief. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If you feel distress or need help, please advise our clerk. For all witnesses and for member of parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions. Also for our witnesses, if you do not feel comfortable at any point, please let us know. We can pause our committee for you. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Before we begin, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the directions on the cards on the table, which are there to prevent acoustic incidents and feedback events and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. In order to ensure the smooth proceedings, I would like to give the witnesses and members some instructions. Please wait to be recognized by me before you speak. And with our two witnesses, click on the microphone icon to unmute your microphone, and please keep your microphone muted when you are not speaking.
Bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pour les députés présents dans la salle, si vous...
For our members present in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The committee clerk and myself will do our best to maintain the order of speakers, and we thank you for your patience and understanding in this regard. I would now like to welcome our witnesses on an individual basis, Dr. Marc-André Bernard, psychologist in Alpha Institute by video conference, and also
Madame Samara.
Ms. Samara Symonds, my apologies, ma'am, appearing by video conference, who was a civil employee of the RCMP and is now retired. Thank you for your service.
Each witness 5 minutes to present their opening remarks. After that, we will proceed to a series of questions with the members of the committee. So, Dr. Bernard, le plancher est à vous pour 5 minutes.
Dr. Bernard, the floor is yours now for 5 minutes.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. So today's subject, which is suicide prevention, is, of course, a very complex subject for military members and veterans. There are factors that make them vulnerable, similar to the population in general, mental health problems related to drug, alcohol consumption, chronic pain, and other factors. And I know that the suicide rate is high among those populations, and we are all aware of specific aspects that cause them to be vulnerable among the forces members. Among the factors, because of time constraints, it's a very specific process of hiring in the Army and being released from the forces, and identity aspects that I would like to focus on today, based on clinical observations that I've been making for the past 10 years with this group. I'm not teaching anything new if I say that being hired by the Canadian Army is a professional commitment, unlike many others, which involves a personal identity that becomes combined with the professional identity and ideals of public service, the common good, defending common values, and comradeship are important, and military members agree to leave aside part of their individuality and self-determination in order to act collectively, sometimes in certain cases at the risk of their life. Needless to say, these career choices involve individual sacrifices and are precise. It's these sacrifices that we ask from them which come back later to feed into the suicide risk. In their military commitment, they have to endure pain, physical discomfort, put aside their emotions, not be concerned about their internal state, and seeing that as something that interferes with working together, which is a way of living that is very hard on the family and can cause uprooting and moving and support structures becoming more fragile. When injuries occur during their career and the military member, for one reason or another, can no longer act in the same way among the group, often that's when distress begins. If they can no longer be part of the institution like others, then the person can be confronted with an inability to manage their internal states that was long ignored, and they have shame and humiliation because of the weaknesses and the deterioration of their individuality as a result of their years of service and training. Of course, without taking into account the day-to-day difficulty of pain, having flashbacks and nightmares, and have to deal with mood problems and learn a whole new allergy to stress and pressure arising from the nervous injury related to operational stress. There is, of course, on top of all that, the stigmatism that is connected with mental health, and many people have a hard time in not making the equivalency between weakness and these mental issues. And it's on this theme of suicide risk connected with the nature of the commitment that I want to think about with you today. And when people leave the forces, it's an episode that, as you are aware, it can lead to depression. And I've noticed this in the clinic. It can increase and foster the emergence of suicidal thoughts. The aspects that demand our reflection are numerous. An absence of real continuity in care is seen as a loss of stability. A repetition of evaluations and redundancy can increase the humiliation and shame and having to face their weaknesses, or increase anger in seeing that their pathway has become bureaucratized. And there's aggressivity, which is one, and humiliation, which are documented causes of suicide, and also a loss of self-determination after having spent 15, 20, or 30 years serving, and it becomes unrealistic and they feel inadequate if they have the impression that they have to prove everything, whereas they've given years of service. Keep in mind that they have been trained to think in this way, which is a dichotomy and not nuanced, because they served well in the operational theater, but there are moments of distress that occur, and the cookie cutter rehab now offered by the PCVRS, although without any doubt it's well intentioned in its will to better support veterans, appears to me essentially not very focused on veterans and doesn't enable them to adjust for more vulnerable veterans whose military identity was everything that they had. And it's for them that I want to testify today. I'm very much aware of how complex it is to assist these men and women in dealing with substantial and chronic injury that they often have. And I recognize how generous the programs are in many ways, as well as advances to destigmatize mental issues in the forces. But I think if we want to consider suicide prevention among veterans, we have to think about the nature of what they're asked to do during their service, and that the transition from a very difficult process, it's a process of acculturation into their own society. In other words, a process where there is an alienation towards civil society at the end of their service. A good soldier is a soldier who deals with their mental health, and the diagnosis should not end their military career, as has often been the case in the past. I've been told that times are changing and that young soldiers are less worried about the stigma of mental health, and I hope it's true. Also, in one of the reports of this committee, I've seen that on release, they recommend that veterans be able to have all of their requests treated by Veterans Affairs and be assigned a civilian family doctor before they're released. I think this is a good example of something that could make a huge difference in the case of many soldiers, reducing their frustration, humiliation, and powerlessness in the very profound loss of identity that they face. And it remains our responsibility to take care of these people who sacrifice some of their health in the public service.
Merci beaucoup,
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard.
Mrs. Symonds.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I wear many hats in relation to this issue and will attempt to speak to all of them in this short time. I am a veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. I was a civilian member intelligence analyst of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and spent most of my service working on homicides and national security. My PTSD from the trauma exposure is real, but many times it was discounted in comparison to Canadian Armed Forces service or regular members of the RCMP. This included comments from Veterans Affairs employees stating that I am taking away resources from veterans who have lost limbs. My experience was consistent that mental health injuries are not treated or respected the same way as physical ones. I can echo much of the testimony you've heard about processes being difficult to navigate and taking too much time. My initial decision took about a year, which is actually very good. And I needed the assistance of Bureau of Pension Advocates, which is a fantastic service, to receive a fair decision a couple of years later. Once I began having children, I realized that PTSD in either parent makes for added challenges during childbirth. At the recommendation of my psychologist and midwife, I applied to Veterans Affairs to cover a doula to help manage my PTSD during childbirth. This is a readily provided support a call. After a 5-minute conversation, they could all understand how little I was asking for and how much benefit it would provide. However, processes reign. I applied in fall 2024. I provided my rationale. I provided medical documentation. I provided research papers attesting to the benefit for PTSD. I looked into any possible healthcare professional that could assess me and verify my claim, but I lived in the north, so my options were limited. I'm awaiting the result of my final level of appeal, and my daughter was born over 6 months ago. I walked in to meet with a Veterans Affairs representative just days before I went into labor. They suggested that the local Legion pay. This is charity I was not comfortable taking. I sought assistance from the Bureau of Pension Advocates, and they provided helpful advice for my appeals, but said they can't help with treatment benefits. I believe this to be a major gap. This one story is exactly the type of battle and weight that veterans and families face when seeking support from Veterans Affairs for service injuries or death. To sum it up, it's onerous, isolating, adversarial, and damaging. I am also the spouse of a veteran. To respect his privacy, I won't be sharing much about my personal experience in this regard. However, almost every day, I grieve for my husband before his injury, and I fight to support him and maintain my own health while doing so. I am unique in that I have VAC treatment benefits for my own service injury. These end up covering my mental health needs as a spouse. I have the treatment that many other family members need and deserve. Regular sessions with a psychologist experienced with PTSD and policing has gotten me through unbelievable circumstances. I've accessed counselors through VAC Assistance Service who describe my family as in crisis and that they don't know how to help us when we're just surviving. I am also a mother. I see the impact of our service already on my very young children. I worry about their ability to access mental health care in their own right one day. I also think it's important to note that you're hearing from survivors and spouses, but the experience of children is lacking to date. I am the co-administrator of an informal support group for spouses of RCMP members and veterans with PTSD. Our group has approximately 700 members. I invited others to testify before you, but the stigma is still significant. So you'll hear from myself and Jessica Ruth only, despite strong following and support for this issue from the group. Until spouses find the group, many feel isolated and are in complete disbelief what their life has become. Divorce is all too common of an outcome, and other women have lived with decades of abuse as they attempt to honor in sickness and in health. The point I would like to make is that almost every unbelievable story is accompanied by multiple responses saying, "I completely understand and have been through similar," and then recommending counseling. Not only do we have the role of caregiver to our veteran, but we often have the absence of a caregiver, as the veteran may struggle with the capacity to provide the typical support of a spouse. It is not sufficient to fund mental health care for spouses as a caregiver. Most of the spouses I've met struggled with their members' PTSD before the member accepted their condition. Most have struggled when their member or veteran refused further treatment. Many still struggle after divorce. Mental health care in their own right can be a lifeline for the veteran's well-being and can help their family to be healthy and continue to contribute to our communities in their own way as nurses, teachers, social workers, and other important roles. Finally, I am the organizer of petition E6654 and co-organizer of improving mental health care for families and survivors of CAF and RCMP. The petition was inspired by Jessica Ruth, who you heard from. What we're asking for is something the Veteran Ombudsman recommended for nearly a decade: service-related mental health treatment for families in their own right. It's unconscionable that families are still waiting to be offered more than short-term counseling and lip service when they contribute so significantly to veteran well-being and often provide support to the veteran well beyond their years of service. The veteran community is watching. We are encouraged to see senators asking the minister about progress on this recommendation. Yet we experience more sanctuary trauma when the question is answered repeatedly with a simple, "There is more for us to do." I've received more informed answers from MPs on and off this committee. It's easy to say the minister is new, but we all know there is a team of professionals behind her that are meant to prepare her for these questions. The bureaucracy continues to fail veterans and their families. True prevention would start with a similar study focusing on RCMP and CAF individually. For the purposes of Veterans Affairs, though, I want to leave you with the simple answer to suicide prevention and answer two questions asked by members of this committee already. MP August, you've been asking for innovative approaches to preventing suicide. Sadly, VAC hasn't even figured out the basics yet. It's so fundamental that the experts don't mention it. Fund mental health treatment for families independent of the veteran before death so they have the skills and capacity to support the veteran. MP Wagenthal, you asked if there is anything you should be doing immediately to help. Provide mental health treatment to families before suicide so they can help their veteran. Fund mental health care after the veteran's death so that the suicide effects don't ripple through families, as we know they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Symonds. Thank you for your courage today, and certainly I think I heard well you just became a mother again, so I want to congratulate you on the birth of your child. We will be starting our round of questions. Each member has 6 minutes. I will start with Mr. Tomey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate our witnesses coming this morning. And Ms. Symonds, I'm sorry to hear what you had to experience and what you had to go through with VAC. VAC should be there to help all members, and not to be there to pick and choose and to prioritize. And so my apologies that you had to experience that. You touched on your petition 6654. I'm wondering if you could please expand on that a little bit for those that are maybe watching this committee, and just share a little bit more about that.
Sure. Currently, VAC allows for some counseling for family members, provided that the veteran is alive and engaging in treatment. And what happened to start the petition is that a family member was receiving funded treatment from VAC, had an established relationship with a psychologist, and was getting much needed support. Unfortunately, their veteran committed suicide, and she was immediately cut off from her mental health treatment at a very vulnerable time. She had the bravery to walk into a town hall with the veteran ombud and confront her with a situation that she couldn't believe was happening to her. The ombud provided the answer that this is something that was contained in a report from 2021, that family members need to have mental health treatment funded by VAC in their own right, not as a caregiver to the veteran. Despite being recommended in 2021 and being agreed to by VAC in the media and in spotlight reports following up on the initial report, we haven't seen any movement to allow this. Often, what we hear is pointing to VAC Assistance Service, who is equivalent to an employee assistance program. You're not guaranteed to get a psychologist. You're not guaranteed to get anyone that is particularly specified in the area that you're seeking assistance with. And so the petition was really a simple call to pay attention to this report from 2021 that asked for this simple thing. And furthermore, in our research since we started this, we've realized that really the veteran ombud was talking about it back in 2016. And this is where I say it's been a decade where we've understood that families have service-related impacts and very badly need access to their own mental health treatment for the service-related impacts.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Can I ask you where people can find that petition so that they can sign it?
Unfortunately, the petition closed with just short of 5,500 signatures. And it was presented into Parliament actually just yesterday afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much. From your testimony, what you've shared a bit of what we've heard from other witnesses about sanctuary trauma, where the organization is supposed to be there to help you, whether you're an RCMP officer or a military veteran. Could you please expand on what your experience has been with that yourself?
Yeah. So I think whether you're Canadian Armed Forces or RCMP, you take an oath, and it's a very deep thing. It's life-changing. And you commit yourself on a level that no other employee is expected to commit themselves. And you do so with the understanding that it is service that is taken very seriously by this country. You're going to do unbelievable things for your country. And the result is that you're going to be supported when you inevitably have unbelievable damage from that commitment for the good of your country. So with that comes an expectation that we accept we have these injuries, and we turn to somewhere like Veterans Affairs to try make us healthy once we've left, and to have your service judged, to have your injury judged or questioned, and to not have any support in your options. It feels very much like you receive a check once a month to compensate for the damage caused to you, and that is all you're going to get for the rest of your life. When all we really want is support to try get us to a healthy place where we can be a new form of employee, where we can be a healthy parent, where we can be a healthy spouse.
Thank you. That was an amazing answer. I really do appreciate it. I want to circle back. You mentioned in your testimony about how you were judged, and you mentioned in this last answer how you feel you're being judged on your injuries, or you know, whatever condition. Do you feel like you're being judged? I want to see if there's a difference between veterans in the RCMP and veterans in the military. Is there a difference? Do you feel you're being treated differently because of your service in a different organization?
Mrs. Symonds, I will allow 15 seconds, unfortunately.
Yes, I do feel that we're treated differently, and furthermore, we are eligible for less benefits, which complicates things.
Mrs. Symonds. I would like to now, for 6 minutes, Mrs. Hurtle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mon français n'est pas magnifique, alors je vais parler en anglais aujourd'hui.
My French is not great, so I'm going to speak English today.
Today and for all the work that you do serving the Canadian veteran community. Committee members, as our first meeting, ensured that we received trauma-informed practices training before any study was undertaken, knowing that witnesses would be bringing both powerful and challenging stories and issues forward. The committee has heard from witnesses in our study about the benefits of ensuring that trauma-informed practices training is made available to those who are working with and ultimately serving the needs of veterans. We've also heard from family members of veterans that there are difficulties, and you've indicated sometimes what they characterize as insurmountable challenges, navigating services or communicating with veterans who are struggling with PTSD, which is where I'd like to begin today. I understand that you encourage a range of therapy techniques in your practice. Can you tell us what are some of the most commonly effective types of treatments in your experience with veterans suffering from PTSD, and how do you view emerging therapies in contrast to more traditionally relied upon approaches?
That's an excellent question. Yes, I've been trained initially in CBT, so there's prolonged exposure therapy that's used, or exposition souvenir du trauma, so trauma-related exposure.
Trauma-related exposure.
Different, like what I was talking about is I don't like the cookie cutter rehab that's going on, because it's about trying to fit everybody in the same kind of process. And I do feel that with vets or RCMP, the journey is so different that new approaches might be necessary. I have some vets who really benefit from therapy with horses. I don't know how you name it in English. But new kind of therapy that sort of help vets. One of the main problem with PTSD is the digestion of emotional baggage, which a lot of people have trouble with. And whatever helps the person to connect with their emotions, learn to manage those emotions, will prevent PTSD from getting bigger. So all those approaches that help the veterans connect with his emotions in a non-threatening way, therapy with horses is one of them, can be very beneficial. I know EMDR is something that's used. This is one of the approaches I've never used before. It's not part of my arsenal, so I cannot comment on this. And there's another type of therapy that's used more. It's called narrative therapy, where there is sort of the idea of making a story about the whole journey that the person goes through in this case, in his professional life, to sort of make milestones of, because the trauma is something that changes you forever. It doesn't mean it has to change you only negatively. There's post-traumatic growth and resilience that have been studied. And a lot of people sort of journey out of it. So there is a possibility for growth through it, but there is a very tough position, a very tough moment where people need to be helped. And I think narrative therapy, what it does is sort of integrate all the parts of your life together and make sense of them, which is what resilience is a little bit what it's about. It's about integrating every part of your life together and being comfortable with it, with better emotional management, which is not something that's being taught in the armed forces. And we can understand it in a certain way, but I think it's the way people are trained to do difficult work like police work or military work requires sometimes to put aside the emotional world, but it doesn't mean that it goes away. It just gets accumulated and complicated. So all the approaches in trauma are about making it simpler to digest those things, making it okay to adjust those things. That's what I was talking about, humiliation and shame, because I feel those are the main, those are things that can lead to suicide, because people would rather disappear than have to face those emotions because they don't know how to deal with them. And they are not made in an environment when it's okay to deal with them. I don't know if this answers your question.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I have, I think, just under a minute left, so I'm going to ask a quick question. It might be yes or no. Do you find that a combination of talk therapies along with monitored acute or long-term pharmacological solutions are effective?
Yes, although there was a period where people used medication way too much and it brought a lot of problems with it. I think in some cases, the combination of the two might be the best way to pass through the hardest part. And if there is talk therapy or strategies to help the person cope with a combination of medication, that could be indicated in many cases.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Gaudreau, pour 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaudreau. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I will begin with Dr. Bernard. I wish to thank you for taking the time
Non seulement
not only to take the time for our veterans, but also to enable us to have a summary
que
and to have a critical mass, a very substantial one, because on average, when you mentioned that you meet 15 to 20 veterans per week, well, I realized that
qu'il nous faut
you have everything we need to be able to submit recommendations. Initially, my question is,
que vous avez entendu.
well, I'm wondering, have you heard the testimony from our witnesses and is it a specific case or is this something that applies to many people?
Absolument pas un cas spécifique.
It's certainly not a specific case. What Ms. Symonds noted is something that I have been observing day by day in my practice. And what I often feel I have to do is to invite the spouse, the husband or wife, to take part in the individual therapy of my patient in order to provide information, to answer the questions and to gather their information, because support is not available elsewhere. I also often see a lot of police officers from the RCMP, and it's also true that in the context
See,
of the RCMP, the services offered are not the same, and access to services is more difficult to obtain. The families are strongly impacted both by military service and by psychological problems that follow. And indeed, as Ms. Symonds said, they're the front line of support of the veteran. The spouse is often one of the factors that will cause the veteran to look for assistance, for support, or provide support. And it's really not a unique case what Ms. Symonds raised today. So what I understand then is that when we say that once, in fact,
Force.
when someone leaves the forces, it's very important to maintain the link, not only because there is
De rester en contact.
a fraternity or a need to stay in contact,
Je ne
fraternal feelings. So
prends en compte lorsque je quitte les.
when people don't want to feel left out when they leave the forces. Is that what I understand? Yes, absolutely.
problématique.
One thing that I know that is a specific problem for the Army right now is the transition to release. There's an absence of continuity of care. Veterans Affairs often doesn't seem to have access to the file. The soldier who's leaving loses his or her doctor and other support personnel. And a psychologist, as a psychologist outside of the Army, they
Seul intervenant.
sometimes I'm the only person as a psychologist. When people are in the Army after they leave, I'm the only one who provides that continuity. And one thing that makes the veterans vulnerable, and I have several examples in mind, including people I'm treating now, is they keep repeating the same thing in evaluations that repeat themselves. They're evaluated properly in the forces, and then they're re-evaluated completely when they leave, as though the previous evaluations in the forces were not taken into account. And often they have to fight with the professionals in order to be able to get the evaluation done because they want a different person to do it, and there's no concern for continuity. And I know that for veterans, it's humiliating to have to tell their story over and over again. And it's very frustrating to face a bureaucracy that gives the impression that there's no continuity. So this substantially increases, I think, the amount of distress with regard to leaving the military. Thank you. I have a bit of time left. So maintaining the link, providing support, and including family members, spouses, parents, or children as the front line. And what I understand as well is
de devenir spécialiste.
the specialization. Becoming a specialist does not mean that a person has done the work in the armed forces, but rather it's to better understand on a case-by-case basis each individual.
Position, les gens devraient
The idea that people necessarily ought to have training specifically for that would enable other doctors such as yourself to pick things up and to maintain that link in order to provide psychological support to those people. Yes, specific training would be necessary, as Ms. Symonds explained. This type of involvement in that type of profession is not very common. You have to understand the implications of this kind of investment in one's career and the impact that it can have. The Army, I can't speak so much to the RCMP, but the Army is a particular culture within a culture. It's a very different culture. And if one is not aware of the culture, then I think that the men and women in the Army will have a hard time opening up. And I think it's much easier for me to do the therapy now, 10, 12 years later, now that I'm aware of the codes and I know about the culture and I know how they operate. It's easier to create a protective tie with them then, I find. Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard. My pleasure.
Je dois vous dire, félicitations, Madame Gaudreau.
Congratulations, Ms. Gaudreau.
5 minutes for 5 minutes.
4 or 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. Ms. Symonds, thank you so much for what you shared today and how it relates to what the Ombudsman shared with me at this committee. I'm just wanting to clarify that you realize that at the moment, VAC is limited in its ability to do what we're requesting. That the government agreed to was that family members deserve to have that mental health care in their own right. However, it's legislation that needs to be changed to give VAC that window to be able to provide that service. So just to clarify, you are asking for this government to make that legislative change to include family members in their own right to receive that treatment. Would you agree?
That is my understanding from the Ombuds, who I trust as a very reputable source of what's required. I have heard different potential ideas that are very much in their infancy, and I appreciate any effort that MPs are making to try and improve services, but we still like the long-term objective of it being properly legislated to protect that right.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Bernard, in your work with veterans, are there ever times when they share their thoughts of committing suicide as the answer to their circumstances?
Yes, they do.
Can you tell me at what point of your engagement with the veterans do you learn of this concern in their hearts and minds?
It's usually something once the therapeutic relationship is installed, something I have to probe for and something I have to bring forth. It usually doesn't come from them.
Okay. Sorry, just to add to that then, as you work through that with them, have they ever shared circumstances where they have considered made or have been encouraged to consider that as an option in light of their circumstances?
I've never seen a case where people were encouraged to consider it, but I've seen vets being shaken by the suicide of combat brothers and being sort of at this opening sort of a door of consideration for it in their mind.
Okay, so if I'm interpreting that correctly, having seen comrades, friends commit suicide, perhaps seeing how that impacts family and whatnot, they are then looking at MAID as an alternative?
Maybe we misunderstood each other. What I meant is when one of their combat brothers commits suicide, it sometimes shakes them to the point of them considering it too.
Okay, I understand. Very disheartening. So you talked about veterans really having a choice in the type of treatment that they choose, and that there are many, many different kinds of opportunities for them. I know they speak to each other and hear where things have gone well with the type of treatment they've received. Can you speak a little bit to the need to give veterans far more choice in what type of treatment that they choose? I know that we have this whole new program with PCVRS that is supposed to be assisting them with finding providers. What's your perspective on the role of the veteran in their own treatment?
Like I said in my presentation, I think it's a difficult position because we need them to be more self-determinating, but it is very hard for them to do because they've learned not to be for many years. So I think they sometimes are lost at the choices they have to make, but I do agree with what you're saying that more choices have to be offered because some approach are not for some people. And for example, exposure to trauma is a very efficient way to treat trauma, but it's a very difficult one, and some people are not made for it, and we have to respect it. I think they should have more choices, and maybe we're out of time, but I do have problem with the way PCVRS does rehab at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. 20 seconds. Can you tell me, you treat PTSD, are you able to discern when an injury is PTSD and when it might actually be due to TBI, a brain injury?
I don't have the expertise for it, but we always screen for it because if there was TBI, there needs to be investigation on that side to make sure those are not overlapping because they can sometimes seem the same, but they won't give the same results in talk therapy.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Bernard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard. And now for 5 minutes, Mrs. Auguste. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So first of all, I want to thank Ms. Symonds for her testimony, and thank you for being here. Dr. Bernard, my question are going to be for you mostly. You spoke about the development of your relationship with the veterans that you are seeing. Sometimes the issue of suicide arises. And I want to know, what are the obstacles that you are seeing in prevention of suicide in your practice? The obstacles that I see very often, they are first in regard to the capacity to bring the veteran to talk openly about this solution. It is quite often a difficult topic to start.
Dont ils vont taire.
It is a topic that they're going to stay silent on because they're trying to protect the family. The other obstacle that I see,
en fait, c'est le même que pour l'ensemble du...
it's the same as for the whole of the treatment. It's that they have been trained to not communicate anything that could be looked at as a weakness.
Pensées suicidaires.
I always try to say that having suicide thought or having PTSD, it has nothing to do with a weakness of character. It's about a suffering. And we have to bring this to the fore to be able to understand what they are talking about. So the main obstacle is to bring the veteran to, be able to open himself to this.
Ils ont souvent peur que
Very often, they are afraid that I'm going to have them committed or that I'm going to take some drastic measure if they mention suicidal thoughts. Whereas, in fact, when we catch it early, we can talk about it for a while and we can dissipate the suicidal thought. We don't have to act quickly, but people think, and I've been thinking for a long time, that you need to act quickly.
Vous avez mentionné les
So earlier, you mentioned the various approaches that you take.
avez vu qui
You talk about various approaches that you're not doing, but that you know about. Miss Symonds said that she had some support with her peers. So in your practice, what do you think of the peer supports for veterans? This is an excellent question because I think that veterans are a bit different on that. Some veterans are going to feel like they need to be supported by people who can absolutely understand their situation. So they're definitely going to benefit by this, from this peer support, because there's lots of things they don't actually need to explain. So this is a very protecting kind of network. While others, they feel that they need to take some distance from the armed forces and also from their peers, their brothers in arms. So for them, the support is really different. It's more about creating a support in the civilian world, and this is better for them. I've seen both, but certainly peers have a great role to play. The issue is that very often, in any case, in the generation that I am treating, these are people who don't talk among each other, which is too bad because they could really offer each other very interesting support if only they could talk about it between themselves.
Vous avez mentionné
Thank you very much. And you mentioned the generation that you are talking about. Can you elaborate? Which generation are we talking about? I have seen a lot of veterans who went in Bosnia, Afghanistan. So we're talking people between 35 and 60 years old in the last 10 years. The new generation of military that are between 20 and 30 years old, I've seen a lot less of them. So could there be some changes, generational changes? The armed forces have evolved. And so I haven't seen many, and I can't really testify to that then. Thank you very much. And my next question is in regard to the therapeutic approach, Are there other approaches that you'd like to talk about with us? The approach that are used is exposure to the trauma. So we get more of a narrative talk happening in that case. But narrative therapy is something that I just added fairly recently. So EMDR, as I said, is used quite a bit in Western Canada as a main approach, but maybe it's a little less used in Quebec, but we use it a little bit. I have several veterans that have benefited from it, others who didn't like it, but it's something that has been existing for a long time. It's not new. The approach that I see, that one that I've seen that has the best result is the one with animals, actually, animal therapy. Thank you very much. And for 2.5 minutes, Ms. Godreau. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's really interesting, this animal therapy, but at the end of the day, what I want to understand is the defense mechanism in an institution when we don't know specifically
manque peut-être d'expertise.
Because of our lack of expertise, maybe. What is the defense mechanism of an institution when you look at something that is, big, heavy, touching, and also restricting in the fact that there's particularities in each case? I mean, what are we going to do as an organization? I'm not sure I understand the question here.
Les fonctionnaires,
We're talking about civil servants, political people who, in fact, do not live the reality of these veterans, like, in terms of mechanism. What can happen? Okay, as a psychologist, it is really easy to see the level of lack of power, of empowerment, and of suffering that we see. And I can tell you, it's very difficult to see. As a civil servant, as a politician, maybe you have even less tools to face this kind of suffering. And the tendency very often to react to this level is to want to do something quickly and to want to we want to frame this. Unfortunately, this creates a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of evaluation, assessments, and this desire to want to reassure ourselves. Well, all it does is forcing veterans to jump through hoops all the time so that we can arrive to a point where we might be getting the treatment we need. I don't think people are doing it on purpose, but it certainly is a process that basically adds to the suffering of the veterans. What I understand is that with all the expertise that we may have to put together programs, when it comes to specifically veterans, we should in fact modulate this, and we should make a really big difference with other type of programs. Yes, that is exactly the fact. I thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mrs. Symonds on the spot, but I saw you nodding at times, and I could see, and we do have a little bit of time before I will have to end this panel to go out of respect to our second panel, but I would really like you, if you could just maybe share some thoughts, because I saw you nodding on my screen, and I'm not sure if any, and I certainly don't want to, and I apologize, I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but I would really like to maybe hear from you for a few minutes about some of the perspective that Dr. Bernard has shared, or questions that have been asked that you would like to reflect on.
Yeah, overall, I would just say that of the many times where the doctor kind of deferred, that maybe not the best sense of expertise or experience with maybe on the younger side, which I still sort of qualify as, and with the RCMP in particular, the comments that he was making, I find to be factual with the experience of those groups, particularly in regard to the fact that some RCMP do have a lot of trauma from the organization specifically, like through the discharge process, through other bureaucratic or managerial things that they experienced either beside or kind of, I don't know, congruent to their trauma in service. And so there's definitely some that really don't want anything to do with that specific population. So I think it's important to consider that while peer support has worked well for me as a spouse, it generally doesn't necessarily translate to every veteran. And also that it's often very informal. And while that's good because it can show up in the way that veterans want it to show up, there has to be a way to kind of promote and support that as well, so that those communities exist. And I would just also say that flexibility is really important, and I think that's part of what the doctor is trying to get at when he says we have to hear people individually and then promote that self-determination for them to request what they need. I really appreciated the equine therapy talk. That's something that I've heard be very positive for veterans as well. And this is the type of thing that often veterans are finding, and those of us that are skilled in kind of bureaucratic things will seek out, but we have to provide research, we have to provide rationale, we have to get a doctor and a psychologist and an occupational therapist and every possible professional imaginable to verify what we're asking for. Whereas if I came in with prescriptions for numerous medications, those would be covered without hesitation.
Well, thank you very much for your contribution. I want to say again on behalf of this committee, thank you for your service. Wishing you all the very best with the little one at home. And I know right now it's difficult times, so thank you for that courage. Dr. Bernard, merci beaucoup d'avoir participé.
Dr. Bernard, thank you very much for participating on your study.
Our next witnesses, encore une fois, thank you. Before we introduce our second group of witnesses for people who are viewing, I would like to provide a trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to suicide and grief, and this may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. For all witnesses and Member of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, and also for our witness, if you do not feel comfortable at any point, please let us know. We can pause our committee for you. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and to activate and turn off your microphone, press the large button on the console. If you would like to use interpretation, you can use the earpiece. There are buttons on the console that will allow you to select the language and modify the volume. With that, I would like to welcome our second panel of witnesses. As individual, Mr. Shane Nedohin, I describe as farmer, I would say a person, and thank you for being here, sir. From the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, Dr. Nicholas Held, Interim Scientific Director. We will be starting by giving you each 5 minutes to present with your opening remarks. After that, we will proceed to a series of questions with the members of the committee. Mr. Nedohin, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members, and fellow veterans. I have a lot of notes I've written here. I realized it was way too much for the 5 minutes, so I'm going to try just hit wave tops and I'll talk fast. My name is Shane Nedohin. I'm a retired JTF-2 assaulter. I've served this country on multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan, 3 tours in Iraq, a bunch of international and domestic deployments. Other than that, I was in just shy of 22 years and I retired in January 2024. I was released for primarily PTSI and TBI, as well as a whole slew of musculoskeletal injuries. Last year, I actually went to Parliament. I went public about a letter VAC had sent me. I'll read what I have here. Last year, VAC sent me a letter ignoring the science and denying that explosions cause TBIs. The same letter was sent to many of my friends. The day I got that letter, I began to plan my own death. Although I'd been experiencing thoughts of suicide, it was VAC and their ignorance that pushed me to the planning phase. I was brought back from that edge because of my amazing family, my wife, my 2 beautiful daughters who are with me here today, and also because of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which put the full weight of their organization behind and helped me fight back against Veterans Affairs when I had lost all hope. The ADM of VAC later said that the letter was a mistake. It should have never happened. I'm not sure I believe that. It was sent to too many veterans, in my opinion, to be a mistake. There's a lot of reasons I'll chalk it up to, but I don't have time to get into them. The problem's since been rectified, but there's a lot that continue to persist, which is why we're here today. A lot of these issues I'd like to bring up, like the bureaucracy of the pay coming through 3 different sources, multiple organizations vets need to deal with, manually harassing vets and weaponizing pay and benefits to their advantage, etc. Some of them have already been touched on, I guess, by other witnesses. However, I'd like to start with talking about PCVRS, as I believe this is a case of a well-intentioned program that does more harm than good based on my experience and that of my fellow veterans I've spoken with. PCVRS is a program more akin to parole than a support system, in my opinion. PCVRS holds veterans hostage by threatening to take away pay and benefits if you refuse to comply with their program. It refuses veterans to use any care provider but a LifeMark facility. More on that in a bit. In my opinion, PCVRS is a mostly redundant program that duplicates many benefits already available to members with Blue Cross B-line coverage and in many cases A-line coverage. It creates a system through its current contract that basically justifies itself, in my opinion, a giant self-licking ice cream cone. The contract that was signed with LifeMark and Loblaws went against advice given by case managers, veterans, public servants, and many others. Since the contract was signed, Loblaws and LifeMark stocks have soared. I challenge the MPs of this House to look into the relations and dealings that led to this contract being signed, because it was rammed through despite opposition to it, and the fact that this government already has a track record of scandals with SNC Lavalin Green Slush. I think it's worthy investigation. Anyways, that's an aside. With respect to the contracting of PCVRS, it forces veterans to use LifeMark and only LifeMark facilities, even if they don't exist in his or her community. I was forced to do my occupational therapy physio assessment virtually by standing in front of my laptop and raising my arms and moving around while the guy on the other end tried to see my range of motion through a grainy video. This despite the fact that I am currently seeing a physiotherapist through my Blue Cross benefits, And I had literally done a proper assessment the week prior, and they wouldn't take that because it was unacceptable to have an assessment that was done through a non-LifeMark facility. So yeah, I brought this up. I brought up these points with the ADM and the head of PCVRS, Danica Arsenault, and I questioned the ADM as to why am I forced to use LifeMark. And I said, is it adherence to contract? He said, yeah, it's contractual obligation. You have to use LifeMark. And I said, but even though LifeMark can't provide services in my area, there's one in Grand Prairie, which it's a long story, but I can't use it. And they won't allow me to use any other provider. So this, in my opinion, this is just an example, one of the examples of things that are leading to difficulties for veterans. And I think that's my time in about 5 seconds. So I'll just leave it there.
Mr. Nedohin, thank you very much, and thank you for your service, sir. Dr. Hell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and the honorable members of the committee. It is an honor to be here speaking with you today. My name is Dr. Nicholas Held. I serve as the Interim Scientific Director of the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, otherwise known as SIMVR. SIMVR exists to enhance the lives of Canadian military personnel, veterans, and their families by harnessing the national capacity for research and mobilizing this evidence into care, policy, and practice. We were established by Veterans Affairs Canada as an arm's-length expert knowledge mobilization center that facilitates research to address the unique demands of military and veteran health. Since 2010, SIMVR has built a network of 50 Canadian universities and colleges in addition to global partners who have agreed to work together to address these health research requirements of the military, veteran, and families. For sake of time, I will just highlight a couple things, but try to skip through some of this. We lead competitive calls for research, we conduct independent peer review, and we also have a large scientific conference known as the SIMVR Forum. It was in Ottawa a couple weeks ago, where we had about 800 people come in from Canada and all across the world. And I just wanted to highlight of note within that suicide risk and support continues to be an area of work at these conferences. And this year there was 8 dedicated presentations and a suicide theme to understand the impact on military and veteran health. We also founded the Journal of Military, Veteran, and Family Health, which is a peer-reviewed academic journal. Through these avenues, we connect the research, care, and policy system so evidence moves into clinical practice, policy, and community practice. The journal itself has published a body of work related to suicide risk and prevention across serving members, veterans, and families. The journal, a search of the journal will yield over 150 items that mention suicide, and just a quick summary of those, since I don't think anyone has probably read all 160, is that key areas of focus might be the military to civilian transition, complex comorbidities of other health-related challenges, the impact and support on families, improving cultural competency of our healthcare providers, and improving data linkages to larger data sets that we need available in this country. There needs to be continued investment into this population data so that we can understand health needs and outcomes of service members throughout their service across various conflict cohorts that we are in and in the years of life after service. Suicide continues among veterans to be a persistent challenge that deserves considerable attention. It has been reported that male veterans are 1.4 times more likely to die by suicide compared to civilian men, and female veterans are 1.9 times more likely to die by suicide compared to civilian females. Further research suggests that when that occurrence of suicide might happen is at a different time point. Male veterans die by suicide roughly on average 3 years after transitioning from service, while females on average die by suicide 20 years after service. This is one example of a critical point where these differences point to 2 important areas of understanding. First, exploring veteran suicide as an entire group is not enough, as we need to understand that diverse experiences in service can relate to ideation, attempts, and death by suicide. Second, there needs to be a continued investment in suicide prevention that does not consider suicide as a single point in time, but as a long-term approach to understanding and managing risk. The literature pinpoints many different factors that increase the risk of suicide, such as traumatic brain injury, chronic pain, or depression, to name a few. But it's critical that we consider suicide as a whole health and whole life course perspective. In 2018, SIMVR led a co-led a roundtable with Veterans Affairs Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces to engage a whole of community approach to suicide prevention. A lot of this based off of Dr. Jitendra Sareen's work and funded by SIMVR. Recommendations that came from this roundtable, and again, this is 2018, was that we need to have provide education, training, and information for practitioners, improve support for transition across the life course, provide support for identity challenges across transition, promote whole of community communication, collaboration, and knowledge sharing, explore policy considerations for suicide prevention, evolve whole of community approaches to care for the suicidal person, and reduce barriers to services. That time again, 7 years ago, it was highlighted that we need more information in several areas. That includes people who need the care, the role of families, understanding gender differences, developing methods for improving listening skills of our healthcare providers, and finding ways to effectively turn research into action. We also, more recently, we co-lead the Five Eyes Mental Health Research Innovation and Collaboration with Phoenix, Australia, aligning research priorities and bringing policy-facing synthesis to ministers across Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the United States. In 2024, the collaboration published a concise Five Eyes view on suicide in military and veteran populations. The report highlighted that while numerous risks have been identified, it remains challenging to determine who will attempt suicide. After decades of investigation, understanding the causes, prediction, and prevention of suicide among military personnel and veterans is still limited. The report highlighted risk factors may include presence of mental and physical health problems, cumulative trauma exposure, medical or involuntary discharge from the military. The report did highlight recommended next steps during service, which might include early identification of mental health problems and suicidality starting from enlistment, with interventions throughout the career and life cycle, easy access to evidence-based personalized care, reducing stigma and other barriers to help seeking, and then education as well for the individuals, peers, families, and communities. And then following service, similar prevention strategies have been recommended, including providing support during and after the transition to military to civilian life, considering the specific circumstances and environments that veterans are transitioning into, and strengthening our support systems for families, equipping them with knowledge and skills to aid in this transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eld. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions regarding the testimony that we just heard. For 6 minutes, Mr. Richards.
Thanks. Shane, I want to ask you a little bit about the LifeMark stuff, but let me ask you about a couple other things first, if I can. I guess, could I ask you this, just to sort of describe, I guess, for those of you who've had to go and fight for our country, and then you have to come back and fight with your government in order to get the help and the support that you need. What does that do to a veteran? Speak from your own experience, speak from the experience of your friends. What does that do when you have to come and fight the government after you've gone and fought for the country?
Yeah, it's well, it's just frustrating because you think that you're supposed to be on your team, and I think that it's well intentioned. I understand the bureaucracy is required to run the government. It's necessary, but I think that we put up a lot of barriers. And I mean, we've seen a lot of institutional abandonment, I think, and what it does is it degrades our trust, our belief. Like, okay, to back up, why does a person join the military? They want to fight for their country. Like, I believed in Canada. But then you come back and it erodes what you believed in, and every time a vet has an incident with VAC where like my incident, for example, it slowly erodes trust in the system, and then it breaks down that belief in your country and what you fought for, and it makes you lose hope in your country.
Yeah, and that it saddens me to hear that, right? Like, I understand it from your perspective and from many veterans' perspectives, but it shouldn't be that way. And I, you mentioned that, the experience you had, and that led you to start, to have some thoughts about, ending it all. And I'm sure you have friends that unfortunately weren't able to battle through it like you were, and did do that. Every veteran we meet seems to have friends that have done that. Do you think that those losses, at least in many cases, were preventable if our government didn't treat our veterans the way they do?
Well, yes and no. I mean, suicide is such a, it could be caused by any number of things. So yes, maybe some are preventable, some are maybe inevitable. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I can tell you that contributing factors that have been brought up during this committee certainly have pushed many vets to the edge. When it's, or you have a vet who's already on the edge, and then, he gets a kick in the teeth from VAC. Well, nobody, it further provides the vet in his own mind the evidence he's searching for to end it all. Yeah, nobody cares. Nobody wants to look out for the vets, so whatever. And again, well-intentioned programs that do the opposite of what they're trying to achieve, in my opinion, sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, and so that's a good segue probably into the stuff with the PCVRS and the life, Marc. You talked about it in your opening, of course. Maybe just talk a little bit more to the effects it has. Speak to your own experience or that of your friends in terms of, like not being able to utilize the service providers that maybe you've already dealt with and trust, or that would be more convenient to you, or that would better help you, and instead having to use ones that you're forced to because of a contract. Maybe speak a little bit to the problems that causes. Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's almost 2 years I've been out now, and I've yet to receive a single rehab session from PCVRS because of bureaucracy. Just, it's always something, it has to be this provider. I'm like, no, I refuse to use that provider because they wanted to give me somebody off in Halifax who specialized in LGBTQ2S plus Indigenous allyship and had never dealt with veterans. And I'm like, no, I'm not dealing with this person as a psychologist because they don't understand me. So then that caused another 4-month delay. And, there's already limited providers. I'm like, why can't I just use the people in my area or people that I'm comfortable? I want the ability to choose. But the government, the PCVRS is saying, no, you will use us or we will take away your IRB. Gone. And I've been told that many times. And that's unacceptable. And they're weaponizing our pay and benefits against us. That shit has to stop yesterday.
Couldn't agree with you more on that. Couldn't agree with you more. Dr. Held, can you, it sounds like we don't have much time, but can you tell us how important it is when someone's experiencing suicidality to be able to access care quickly? It's not just the emergency stuff that needs to come right away, but the follow-through care. How important is that, and what does it do when someone has to keep coming back 5, 6, 7 times to try and get that care?
Yeah, I think care is quite important. That's a challenge in this country across many different aspects of health. And I think that cultural competency piece of somebody who understands military service, at least at a basic level, is something that we need across the country. And that's something that our work actually does, is looks at informing cultural competency, military experience among healthcare providers. Veterans have said within 90 seconds they can tell if their healthcare provider understands even a little bit about their experience. We're not saying every healthcare provider has to live in that experience of the military, but it has to have some kind of basic knowledge, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Held. For 6 minutes, Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here this morning. Mr. Nedohin, thank you very much for your service. I wanted to ask you, sir, do you suffer from persistent or chronic physical pain as a result of the injuries you sustained during service?
Yes.
And in your view, what impact has that had on your life since you've sustained those injuries, the pain piece of it in particular?
Well, you live with pain every day, and anybody who's ever lived with chronic pain knows it affects your mental condition. It affects your moods. It makes you irritable. Somebody who's always in pain, you ever have somebody who has a toothache, or they're cantankerous and irritable, and you couple the physical pain with the TBI, and what's going on there. I suffer from vertigo, dizziness, Some days I'm good, some days I'm bad. So it's just something you live with, and it impacts you greatly, and you figure a way through it.
Thank you for sharing that. And the reason why I wanted to ask from a personal standpoint for yourself, sir, of course, is Dr. Held. I know from a clinical standpoint, you've done a lot of work throughout your career as it relates to chronic pain. So in your view, from a research standpoint, how does chronic pain impact veterans, obviously from a physical standpoint, but also the mental healthcare piece of it as well, in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So chronic pain, we know, almost affects Canadian military veterans at almost twice the rate it does of the Canadian general population. And it is highly comorbid with mental health concerns. And that is something where mental health is going to exacerbate the pain symptoms that you might feel, and also vice versa. There's a relationship there that's independent. There's also a relationship between chronic pain and suicide. So all of these things are connected. And I think that was one of the pieces of my opening statement that's important, is that suicide is not a point in time thing necessarily. It's important throughout the lifespan of somebody, and all of these conditions coming together. And one of the biggest challenges, we've identified many different risk factors, but still that 10 years or longer of research, that understanding of what moves somebody from those risk factors into attempting suicide, there's still more work to be done.
And you touched on the research and the work that SIMVR is doing, which is great work. But my question is, how do you translate the academic research work you're doing, and how do you inform that to VAC to make sure that veterans are able to benefit directly from the work that you're doing on a day-to-day, operational level? How do you take your research and put it into practice?
Sure. That's a great question, and I'll start off by saying there's no perfect way of doing that across all nations, across the Five Eyes nations, where there's different mechanisms. One of the things at Forum is we just hosted a panel on how to do this effectively. So we facilitate research out across Canada, and we also have regular meetings within CFHS, the Canadian Forces, and with Veterans Affairs Canada. We have avenues like the journal that I mentioned that is open access, free to anybody to access. We have the SIMVR Forum that brings people together. And then we are doing some work on the ground as well, like improving cultural competency through continuing medical education, credits, things like that. So it's through constant conversation, and I think there is a question on whose responsibility is that, and that could be a framework that I think gets discussed moving forward. Is oftentimes those in members of parliament and government agencies might say it's on the researchers, they need to push that information more into government. We obviously have a piece of that because we are that bridge in between, and that's something that we work closely on, and researchers feel like it's up to government to kind of grab some of this research and implement it in an evidence-based way. So the key thing is here, there's no perfect mechanism, but we all have a role to play in that. And of course, we have a significant role to kind of bridge that gap as well with clinicians, with veterans themselves, with healthcare providers, and with government individuals as well.
So, Dr. Held, based on what you said there, would it be fair to say that, is there a consistent, regularized, formalized process for your work to be transmitted directly to Veterans Affairs, so you can say, hey, this is what we're learning, this is what might work, and you guys can take that and implement it into your policies? Or is it a bit more piecemeal at this point?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's a bit more piecemeal. I think it's also very simplistic to think that you can take kind of one study and we're going to move that forward to have all the answers. We need to inform individuals, and then we have to be frank where I come from a science background. I believe in evidence-based medicine. That's something that's important. But within policy-making and decision-making, there's 1,000 different factors at play there, and research is only going to be one piece of that. So it is piecemeal. There's decisions that are made, and I know that it's not always only looking at evidence, and that's something we're not going to change. But we also tend to say things are evidence-based. Many times it becomes common nomenclature in many areas, and I think we need to look at that mechanism and make sure that we're able to take that research into practice.
And in your opening statement, Dr. Held, you talked about the work that you do with the Five Eyes and our peer countries, and we've heard in previous meetings during this study that unfortunately the issue of suicide among veterans is a familiar and consistent story across a lot of our peer countries. Are there any lessons learned or any insights that you've gained through that work through some of our peer countries where they might be doing well in areas that we could be emulating? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Okay.
Sorry.
I think we can look to the the Royal Commission into Defense and Veteran Suicide as a systemic and systematic way of looking at this. I think that's a critical piece. In 10 seconds, it's hard to answer that question fully, but I think we need to think about all systems level and how we can approach this.
Thank you very much. Madame Gaudreau, pour 6 minutes.
Mrs. Goudreau for 6 minutes. Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that the witnesses can hear the interpretation and that the sound is good. Very well. Thank you.
Dr. Hales.
I'll begin with Dr. Held. Do we have access to evidence that could demonstrate, if these exist, that there is a disengagement of enrollment in the Canadian Armed Forces following everything that we saw in Bosnia and Afghanistan? Is there evidence that indicates that there is actually less desire to join the military?
I'm not aware of any specific studies that I could pull on that would provide that information right now. I think you could look at enrollment rates, and you could, within why people are enrolling and why they're not, and people leaving service, that would be, we have a lot of information that sits internally, especially the DND, that isn't accessed by other outside organizations that might have a little bit of that answer. If I'm thinking of not necessarily at the enrollment phase, but in the exit interviews and things about why people are releasing and the challenges we have with retention, those things could possibly come up, but I can't speak to that internally. Yeah.
On constate qu'il y a.
We've noted that there is a care process that, of course, should change. And we're realizing that, and we've seen that in your testimony from Mr. Nedohin. But we're dealing with the care. We want to quickly care for, then we want to move to something else. But we are seeing people who go ahead with their intentions after 20 years. It seems to me that we need to see a cultural change when it comes to the veterans, when it comes to palliative care. When somebody suffers from a traumatic brain injury, that doesn't simply happen magically. These people require care. Do we have any data that explain that, in fact, that currently palliative care delivered to veterans is currently insufficient?
I think when you talk about palliative care, and especially if you talk about it in an aging context, we've had some changes within government policies that the treatment of aging veterans has shifted over time. So I think that's a key piece of consideration, and we just published a report that I'd recommend on reading on aging veterans as well. And I know palliative care is not only an aging perspective, but I think that's something that we need to consider. Within palliative care, I think it still leads into the healthcare system of, we've worked at the levels of physicians to try to increase kind of military awareness, but it's not always the physicians that are spending a lot of time with our veterans. So oftentimes it is at different levels of healthcare that we need to make sure that we are not only investing in primary care, being kind of frontline physicians and psychiatrists, but moving down that level of care, individuals that might see individuals in that state as well.
Okay, merci. Maintenant.
Thank you. Now,
Je vais parler tranquillement.
I'll speak very slowly.
Comment on peut penser avoir une.
How can we even think that you can live a good life after having served?
Fier.
After having been proud of our country, Mr. Nedohin, so after coming back to our family, and then to say, well, this dream wasn't a real one. So how do you go about living a life that was full of pride and serenity, and that when you suddenly come back with trauma, what as a human do we then need to help you, and how to help all of the veterans who are in that situation?
I think it's going to be different for every individual. I think speaking for myself, I want to be left alone. I just want to be left alone. Like I want, like, yeah, like the benefits. Okay, just like recognize that vets are injured and stop. I guess it's like putting the onus on the vets to prove their injury all the time, and that's what it feels like. Yeah, I don't know how else to kind of answer the question, like, because I can only speak for myself personally.
Is
that you want to be left alone? So that, yet again, do you have to be re-traumatized to explain
nos enjeux,
what our issues are, whether they be physical and mental. But at the same time, you require ongoing service when you need it. That is for the rest of your life.
Yeah. The way I look at it is, right now, I'm capable of setting up my life in a way that I can care for myself. You know, if I need physio, I can go access that. I don't need a nanny state to sit over top of me and tell me, oh, you need a new medical assessment now because it's another 18 months and you just still prove your legs are there. And I don't need a nanny state monitoring me, and I just need, here's what's available to you for your pay and benefits. We'll sort all that out in the first year or whatever of your release, and then leave me alone. Like, that's what I want. Maybe it's not what other vets want, it's what I want.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Apologize. Mr. Viersen, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Nedohin, you're listed here as farmer. It's an interesting.
I didn't know that was going to be displayed. Okay. It's just I think it's a job title.
I appreciate that. I'm a auto mechanic. I was wondering if that was a choice, given that most people have their rank and like it says retired and things like that. Is that the case, or?
I don't know. That's my past life. It's not who I am anymore. I'm now a farmer.
Okay. Okay. No, that's fair. The other thing is we've heard from a number of family members who have had family members take their own lives, and kind of a recurring thing that I hear about is they say that they were on a cocktail of drugs. Was that the case for you as well?
I still am. Okay. As a matter of fact, and it's my own fault, I ran out of my prescription, one of my prescriptions, and this morning or yesterday when I flew here, I realized I didn't have it. So I'm like currently going through withdrawal on that just because of that cocktail. Now, I mean, like, I don't know. They're just like, it's all stuff they're for my TBI and stuff like that, where they're trying to help, but I don't know. I'm not going to fault doctors for putting me on a cocktail of drugs. Some of them I need, like I need my blood pressure medication, or else I'll have a stroke. Like, it's, I don't know.
Well, that's fair.
Not a doctor.
But has that been folks that have taken their own life, do you know what, like, we start to hearing a little bit about these SSRIs, it's like antidepressant drugs, these kinds of things. It's an interesting thing that a side effect of them is suicide. While we're trying to prevent suicide with them, a side effect is suicide. You see the circular logic there. Any comments on that?
I don't know that I'm qualified to speak on that. I'm sorry.
We've also heard from folks who have been communicating with VAC that they've been offered MAID. It was pretty compelling testimony on Tuesday. Any experience with that at all?
Not for myself, but I personally know a friend who was offered it.
Yeah. Dr. Held, when I talked about SSRIs, you were writing something down. Do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, I guess my only comment on it, I'm not a medical doctor, as well, so I'm not trying to jump into that space by any means. For me, it was the idea that we talk about suicide as a potential side effect, which is really important to consider, and it highlights the key piece to this is having that evidence where we know who something does work for, but also importantly is who it could potentially harm. We could talk about many different areas there where it does work for some people, but as a standard practice of healthcare, we also need to know who it may not work for and put some time into that as well.
Okay. And is that work being done that you know of? Or?
I'm not sure about the SSRIs, but things that were brought up on Tuesday, things like psychedelics and things, which I'm not trying to get into that space in that conversation, but there's research being done and there's more to be done to understand that a bit more as well.
Shane, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I used psilocybin. Obviously, I had to obtain it, in alternative methods. I would say that was one of the single most beneficial things I ever did. It was a massive turning point for me, and it allowed me to process a lot of things, and I don't want to go as far as to say maybe I wouldn't be here without it, but it was a massive help, and I really, really, truly believe that we need to be allowing that.
You would recommend that be pursued?
Based on my personal experience, yes.
Okay. Now, I'm an auto mechanic in my former life, and often when you're trying to diagnose a problem, you zoom in and you zoom out. Sometimes the problem is a very small piece, and sometimes the problem is a very large piece, and you gotta go upstream and downstream to find those kinds of things. In this case as well, trying to figure out the veteran suicide situation. One of the things we keep hearing about is this term moral injury, and that's one of these cases where it can either be a very large, like 30,000 foot problem, or it can be like right in somebody's individual life. Did we do the right thing? Are we part of the good guys? These kinds of questions. And I hear often people say they don't recognize Canada anymore. Do you think that that's part of the moral injury? Like people went to fight for a country and come back and don't recognize the country they return to?
Well, since you asked the question, it's not going to be a popular opinion, but I don't believe in Canada anymore. Yeah, I'm an Albertan and I want to leave.
And you would say that you fought for something that...
I loved Canada.
Yeah.
I believed in Canada until a point. Yeah. And again, I know it's not going to be popular with, I don't know, this side of the table, I guess, but the last decade has, no. Yeah. That's not what I fought for. The country I'm watching, and this is my personal opinion, but it is, I've heard this reflected from a lot of my fellow vets that they don't recognize, like, let's take Afghanistan, for example. The Canada we knew and we went to go, we believed what we were fighting. I believed in what we were fighting for in Afghanistan. And we watched it retaken by the Taliban and go right back to the way it was. And then I come back here and, our government's ashamed to even put up a war memorial for Afghan vets. They try to tuck it away and hide it behind NDHQ, not invite anybody to go to it. And then that's an absolute disgrace. And we continue, and it's not just vets, it's a lot of other things, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thank you very much, sir. We are now Mr. Casey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Held, I want to start with you on a point raised by Mr. Nedohin around psilocybin. We've heard some of that testimony throughout the course of this. Can you offer commentary on the state of research with respect to psilocybin? I mean, what we hear is anecdotally this works. We heard it again today. But what we also hear is that we're not ready for mainstream approval because the evidence is not there yet. As the scientific director of SIMVR, where are we with respect to the research into psilocybin?
Yeah, so I can speak to the higher level aspects of this and I don't want to it is not an intention to discredit anecdotal experience. That's not what research does, right? So psilocybin is something that might be beneficial to some people. The state of the research is that there's various levels of clinical trials that are underway, some within Canada, more within Australia and the United States as well. Effectiveness of any kind of therapeutic intervention is one piece of it. There's also challenges with implementation that we have to understand from a healthcare system. And then we also have to understand those pieces where it can do harm. There is some research out there that suggests that suicide might be a side effect. Now, I'm not saying that's strong. I don't know that research specifically, but it is mentioned. So there's things where there is a potential for these things to do harm as well. And it's like anything, life-saving medicine, balancing the overall picture of what is beneficial versus what could be harmful as well. So research is clearly underway, and there's a lot of work in that area. There may be potential for that in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nedohin, I want to come to you. You talked about the letter that you received from Veterans Affairs that ignored science with respect to traumatic brain injury, and you said that what saved your life was your family and the Concussion Legacy Foundation. Is that Tim Fleiser?
Yes.
Okay. We've heard from him at committee before. Can you talk about their role in pulling you back?
Well, the biggest thing was they believed me, first of all, and the weight of their organization, but the amount of like the connections they have, but the research that they have, and it was one of the things that, like last year when I was here dealing with all that I brought up. It's like, why are we not leaning more heavily on private industry? Private industry is always going to surpass government when it comes to research, when it comes to anything else. Dr. Sid Kershaw, the chief medical officer of VAC, said something in a conversation with me about how they only have a small research team and it takes them a long time to research. And I said, well, in my opinion, why are you not relying more heavily on private industry and accessing those resources? And there was, a slew of different reasons, but that's kind of what I would say. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah.
After you talked about the Concussion Legacy Foundation, you said that the ADM said to you that the letter was a mistake. And then I thought I heard you say, but the problem is rectified. What do you mean by that?
So the issue where vets were receiving these letters saying, like, denying that explosions could cause basically brain damage, they've since stopped sending out those letters and started recognizing TBI as a claimable injury. But until that point, we were not able to claim TBI, or we would put in the claim and it would just sit in limbo for years. I know mine, I think, was 2 years or more. Some guys are like 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years. There was no approvals. And then I went public, and then lo and behold, they got politically embarrassed, or publicly embarrassed, whatever, and boom, all of a sudden the research was good to go. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Held, you got shortchanged on trying to answer Mr. Clark's question in 10 seconds with respect to the collaboration with the Aussies. You can use the rest of the time to give us a more complete answer, please.
Okay.
That's right, twice as much as you had.
Almost double time, so that's great. I guess I'll answer it by saying one of the key things is that we have very similar levels of government. That's why we have the Five Eyes nations, and that's from cultural experiences of most of the countries within the Five Eyes and military experience as well. We know that the psychedelic research, other research within Australia is a bit further ahead than what it is in Canada. There's ways that we should be looking at collaborating and leveraging understanding. This work's going to have to be done in Canada. It's a different mechanism, of course, but to leverage what we have within those Five Eyes nations and make sure that we are collaborating with various different agendas within research and outside, I think is a critical thing for us to do.
Thank you. Madame Gaudreau, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci.
Ms. Goudreau, 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
J'aimerais savoir, Le feeling.
I'd like to know what the feeling is, given what you have lived in these last few decades.
Avec l'augmentation de la défense.
I'm concerned with the increase in defense spending, what we're seeing with the world economic crisis, etc. So we've heard about engagement and the pride of enrolling in the Army. So for a veteran, such as you, do you believe that the next generation will be tougher? It'll be harder to find a new generation.
Sorry, did you say fund the next generation?
Non, en fait.
Sorry.
No, what I...
To fund the next...
No, to find the next generation.
To have a...
Okay. I mean, I don't know. Like, when I was leaving the military, like, it was a sinking ship. I don't know. I've been out of it for a while. Is it?
Second. C'est bon. Okay. Please, Mr. Nedohin.
Yeah, I mean, well, like our
maybe 3 minutes.
If I understand your question, you're basically asking me, like, where is the Army headed, or where is the military headed? Is it going to be difficult to find people to put into the military based on? Well, I certainly tell people not to join the military because of its current state. We have neglected and destroyed our military over the last, well, since we left Afghanistan in a combat role, it's been getting defunded, basically. Not defunded, but it's not been having the money pumped into it that it needs to. And now we're playing catch up. It's like a student who didn't study all semester and now is cramming at the last minute for a test because we ignored the fact that a global war is potentially coming. And people have been screaming at the top of their lungs, shouting it from the rooftops that we need to invest in our military. So why would anybody want to join the military when you're gonna there's no military housing available, you're gonna have the worst gear, you're gonna be treated and paid not very well. I don't know what it's like now. I'm hearing it's actually picking up pretty good, so I don't know. People want to join to be warriors and to fight.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We will have about, let's put, about 3 minutes in 3 minutes to close this panel. So Mrs. Wagenthal for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you both for being here. Shane, you have a TBI. There's no question about that. Concussions, every veteran knows, can cause that injury, as well as some pharmaceuticals. We can say that mefloquine, we know, causes a brainstem injury, but it gets conflated with PTSI. And I don't understand why. I know there is a crossover of some, but there are areas that identify them specifically. So I don't understand, Mr. Held, why we don't push the fact that we understand and know what TBIs are and PTSI is. And yet we sometimes are very selective and say Canada can't do this on its own. It needs the help of other countries to study this. And then other times we're told, well, no, they know that already, but we don't, so we need to study it. This is causing great duress within our veterans. Can you identify a TBI injury versus PTSI?
Not a medical doctor, so it's hard to say. I do think we need to talk.
Or not?
Sure. There's common symptomology, of course, and there's very big differences between PTSD and TBI. I understood. A little bit about this is the research to action piece that's important. Are those questions being asked when you go into your healthcare provider? If you've had previous concussions, or again, you know the role of being a breacher or whatever it might be, that you've been around blasts for a long time. These things are important pieces of healthcare. I can't say whether they're being asked or not, but it's important to understand this information when we're treating anybody, but veterans as well.
But you would think VAC would understand that. I'm asking you a question you probably prefer not to
Well, I think there's
Shane?
times where the research is there. I think it's important to have a separate medical code or understanding of different issues. Yes.
Shane?
There's something, I don't know if it's come up in any of the witness testimonies, but it's called operator syndrome, if anybody in this room has ever heard of that. And in this, and I've heard it's an official diagnosis in the States, but I can't confirm that. I'm not sure if it's a term that gets thrown around more loose, but it's an all-encompassing thing that, especially guys in the soft community who are exposed to more combat, more heavy breaching, more trauma. So there's increased PTSI, likelihood of PTSI, increased likelihood of TBI, substance abuse in order to dull the pain, musculoskeletal disease. You start taking every single factor that we've discussed here today, because you can't put your finger on any one thing and say, yep, this part over here, that's PTSD, and this is TBI, and this is that. They just all come together. To use your mechanics reference, your vehicle works as a unit, and if one part's out of sync, it can throw out all the other parts. And I think the operator syndrome thing is something that we really need to be working with our American allies. I know there's a big push in Canada to be moving away from America right now, but we will never move away from America as our ally. They are 100% our closest ally, and we need to work with them. They're our brothers in arms, and they've got stuff figured out because they have the most powerful military in the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For 3 minutes, Mrs. Ertel.
Thank you. Dr. Held, I heard from Legion members in my riding about the benefits of peer supports, peer support networks, but there seems to be a different response between the older veterans and the modern veterans. I'm wondering if you've seen that, what experience you have, what thoughts you might have.
Yeah, thoughts on that. So there's a rise in peer support, which I think is really important, and it's a great thing. There's a rise in various aspects of peer support that might be more accessible. We do see differences between modern day veterans, and we see differences between older veterans that the Legion's a great example, would have relied on the Legion a bit more for that kind of peer support community. This is more of a personal thought, but the thing that always concerns me is that, like we talk about today, hearing some of these challenges that veterans face is challenging. And as a peer support member, I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that we have to serve those individuals with peer support. That's important, but that individual is taking on trauma as well, so support for them is something to consider, whatever that might look like.
Thank you. I'll pass the rest of my time to MP Casey.
I'll stay with Dr. Held. When you were giving your opening presentation, there was a ton of information there. I was furiously taking notes, and my notes aren't that great. But before you talked about the Australian collaboration, you talked about what seemed to be a summit in 2018 that included Veterans Affairs and a specific, I think, academic. Can you come back to that? What I noted was that one of the themes was educational training, the other was identity challenge. Can you give us some more color around that 2018 event?
Yeah, so I was not with the organization for the 2018 event. There is an entire thing on our website that I will pass along that has the full synopsis of that. There's a 2018 and a 2019 that came out of SIMVR-funded work by Jatender Serene. So I tried to, and that then led to this roundtable that included Veterans Affairs and Canadian Forces Health Services as well. I went over the highlights of critical areas of importance that need to be highlighted, emphasizing that we've known these things for a little bit of time now, since 2018, and it's good to see that we're acting on them a little bit, but we have to push that further.
Okay. You specifically referenced, just prior to that, investment in suicide prevention as a sustainable solution, I believe, is the way you framed it. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I think it deserves attention, right? Suicide is a significant topic, and we know that one veteran suicide is too many. We need to find ways that we can do two important things in my mind. Continue to fund programs that support veterans, that are effective programs and meet their needs. We also need to evaluate those. It's one thing to set up programs. It's another thing to understand if they're having their intended impact, and if they're not, how do you change that? The other thing is suicide prevention strategies are hard hard to evaluate in some sense in large data sets, but it's also very important. So one thing in smaller data sets is if somebody doesn't complete an act of suicide, how is that reported, right? It's not reported as a suicide, so it's hard to think about those strategies. But if we look and we make this investment into longitudinal research over time, you can see where different points in time something like this has come forward, and we would hopefully see action and a reduced suicide risk over time, not risk, sorry, but suicide over time in our veteran population. But if we only have these one-year small studies without that investment into the larger data sets, we're not really going to know if there's been an impact over time.
Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you to have come in front of us, and I know that your kids are here, so it's a pleasure to have welcomed you here in Ottawa, sir. Notre prochaine réunion aura lieu le
Our next meeting will take place on Thursday, November 6th, 2025. We will begin the study of the draft project on Indigenous veterans, as had been suggested. I would like to know if it pleases the committee to adjourn the meeting.